Welcome. Tonight, we invite you into a peaceful corner of the universe. In the earliest days of the universe, long before humanity's rise and the existence of the Imperium, the galaxy was a place of primal chaos, where stars and planets formed in violent, uncontrolled bursts. In this primordial expanse, there emerged the Old Ones, a race whose origins were so ancient that they predated almost all sentient life in the cosmos. Their existence marked the beginning of order in a universe ruled by entropy. The Old Ones were ancient beyond comprehension, their lifespans so vast that even the longest-lived races that came after could not fathom their full history. Their forms were mysterious, capable of shifting between the physical and the immaterial, and they had mastery over the very fabric of reality. With their advanced psychic abilities, they could manipulate the warp, a dimension of pure energy and thought, using it as a conduit for their vast powers. Through this mastery, they built entire star systems, shaping worlds according to their design. During their ascendancy, the Old Ones explored the galaxies, spreading their influence far and wide. Unlike the violent empires that would follow, the Old Ones believed in the cultivation of life, seeding worlds with the essence of existence. They were not simply conquerors or rulers, but architects of life itself. From barren, inhospitable planets, they fostered new species, imbuing them with the potential for sentience and growth. They nurtured young civilizations, guiding their development, teaching them the mysteries of the universe, and encouraging them to seek out harmony within the stars. In their prime, the Old Ones constructed a webway, a vast network of interconnected portals that allowed them to travel between distant parts of the galaxy with ease. This allowed them to oversee their creations, monitor the balance of the galaxy, and defend their realms if ever necessary. Their empire, though vast, was not one of domination but one of stewardship, watching over the myriad forms of life they had sown. Yet, despite their power and wisdom, the Old Ones were not without their challenges. The galaxy was still a wild and dangerous place, and many threats lurked in the dark reaches of space. Strange, primal creatures roamed the stars, entities with the potential to disrupt the harmony the Old Ones sought to impose. But these threats were trivial to the Old Ones, mere distractions to their grand design. Among the many species created by the Old Ones, some began to flourish, while others perished, unable to adapt to the conditions of their worlds. Yet those who thrived did so under the careful guidance of the Old Ones, growing in complexity and power. Some of these species would later become the precursors to races that would define the galaxy's future. But in this era, they were little more than nascent sparks of potential, still shaped by the watchful hands of their creators. The Old Ones' culture was rich in knowledge, and their technology was indistinguishable from magic to the civilizations that would come after them. Their command of reality allowed them to manipulate time, space, and matter itself. They built cities that floated among the stars, where every desire could be fulfilled with a mere thought. They tapped into the warp not as a force of chaos, but as a source of infinite possibility, a realm of untapped potential that they alone could control. For eons, the Old Ones presided over this golden age of creation. They watched as life flourished across the galaxy, from the smallest of organisms to the grandest of civilizations. To the Old Ones, this was the natural order, and they saw themselves as the caretakers of this balance. Their role was to ensure that life would continue to grow and evolve, reaching heights of potential that only they could envision. But as time passed, the Old Ones faced new and unexpected challenges. Their creations began to grow beyond their control. Among the countless worlds they had touched, some species began to evolve rapidly, developing powers and intellects that rivaled those of their ancient benefactors. These upstart civilizations began to question their place in the universe, and with that questioning came the seeds of rebellion. Furthermore, darker forces stirred in the depths of the warp, as the burgeoning psychic energies of the galaxy began to ripple through that dimension, creating disturbances that even the Old Ones could not fully contain. In a distant corner of the galaxy, far from the lush worlds nurtured by the Old Ones, a harsh and unforgiving planet baked under the fierce radiation of its sun. This was the homeworld of the Necronter, a people who would become one of the galaxy's most tragic and fearsome races. Unlike the vibrant and diverse worlds of the Old Ones, the Necronter's planet was a place of desolation. Its atmosphere was thin, offering little protection from the sun's lethal radiation. The Necronter were forced to live in towering metal cities to shield themselves from the intense heat and radiation that ravaged their world. From birth, every Necronter bore the curse of their world's deadly conditions. Their lifespans were agonizingly short, marked by constant suffering from the ravages of radiation poisoning. Even their greatest leaders and brightest minds could not escape this fate. They were a dying race, cursed by the very stars that had given them life. The slow decay of their bodies made them resentful, filled with a sense of bitterness and futility. As a result, their society became obsessed with death, and their entire culture was steeped in a grim fatalism that colored everything they did. Despite these harsh realities, the Necronter were a people of immense determination and intellect. They channeled their suffering into technological innovation, creating advanced machines and weapons in a desperate bid to conquer their hostile environment. Their scientific achievements were considerable, but nothing they built could extend their lives beyond the brief span allotted to them. Their hope for a cure to their short lifespans was always just out of reach, a tantalizing goal that eluded them despite centuries of effort. As their understanding of science grew, so did their ambition. They turned their eyes to the stars, hoping that the secrets of the cosmos might hold the answer to their plight. The Necronter developed ships capable of traversing the vastness of space, and soon they began to expand beyond their desolate homeworld. Their early conquests were driven by desperation, as they sought habitable worlds where they could escape the ravages of their sun. But no matter how far they ventured, the curse of their biology followed them. The Necronter colonies across the galaxy were still bound by the same short, painful lives. It was during this time of expansion that the Necronter first became aware of the Old Ones. The Necronter were not alone in the universe. They soon discovered the flourishing civilizations seeded by the Old Ones, and it filled them with a bitter envy. These younger races, touched by the Old Ones' guidance, lived long, peaceful lives on verdant worlds. To the Necronter, these races represented everything they could never have: health, vitality, and the promise of a future free from suffering. As they encountered more of these old, one-protected species, their resentment grew into hatred. The Necronter, always a proud and warlike people, began to see the Old Ones not as benevolent creators but as cruel gods who had cursed them with their short, miserable lives. In their eyes, the Old Ones had denied them the right to live in peace, had created them only to let them suffer. Their bitterness festered, and soon the Necronter Empire turned its attention to war. The Necronter were united under a single ruler, the Triarch, a council of 3 kings who commanded their entire race. The Silent King, the most powerful of the Triarch, was driven by the same desire as his people: to break free from the chains of mortality. Under the leadership of the Triarch, the Necronter Empire grew ever more aggressive, preparing for the inevitable conflict with the Old Ones. But even as their military might increased, their desperation grew. The Old Ones, with their psychic powers and advanced technology, seemed invincible, and the Necronter's short lives meant they could never hope to outlast them. As the Necronter spread across the galaxy, they engaged in frequent skirmishes with the Old Ones and their progeny. These early conflicts were devastating for the Necronter. Their technology was formidable, but the Old Ones wielded psychic powers that the Necronter could not comprehend or defend against. Each defeat deepened the Necronter's hatred and sense of futility. For every Necronter who died in battle, another was born into the same cursed life. They had advanced far beyond their beginnings on a desolate world, but they were still a dying race, no closer to escaping their fate. This period of conflict and expansion marked the height of the Necronter's empire. They controlled vast swaths of the galaxy, and their technological achievements were rivaled only by their bitter desire to overcome their mortality. Yet, despite their power, they were still at the mercy of time and fate. Their efforts to defeat the Old Ones through conventional means seemed doomed to failure. It was in the depths of this despair that the Necronter turned their gaze to the stars once more, not in search of new worlds to conquer, but in search of a solution to their existential plight. In the burning heart of the galaxy's stars, they found what they sought: the Tan, the star gods. These ancient, godlike beings had existed since the birth of the universe, feeding on the energies of the stars themselves. The Necronter believed that in these beings, they had found the answer to their suffering. The Tan offered them the promise of immortality, of freedom from the curse of their dying bodies. This discovery would set the stage for the most profound transformation in the Necronter's history, and for a war that would reshape the galaxy for millions of years to come. In their despair, the Necronter turned to the stars, seeking a solution that had eluded them for so long. As their science advanced and their empire expanded, they began to probe the deeper mysteries of the universe. In the distant reaches of space, among the blazing infernos of the stars, they discovered something strange, something ancient. It was here, within the swirling heart of stars, that the Necronter first sensed the presence of the Tan, beings of immense power, born from the very fabric of the cosmos. The Tan had existed since the dawn of the universe, primordial entities formed from the swirling energies of creation itself. They were unlike anything the Necronter had ever encountered. These entities were not bound by flesh or bone. They were beings of pure energy, their vast consciousnesses diffused across the matter of the stars. For eons, they had been feeding on the energies of these stellar bodies, their power growing immeasurable. To the Tan, time was meaningless. They cared nothing for the lives of the mortals who crawled on the planets below. They existed to feed and to thrive, drifting from star to star in the great emptiness of space. But as the Necronter delved deeper into the mysteries of the cosmos, they found a way to communicate with these ancient entities. The process of contacting the Tan was dangerous and beyond the comprehension of most Necronter. It required technologies and energies that stretched even their vast intellects to the breaking point. Yet, in their desperation, they pressed forward. Through their relentless pursuit of knowledge, the Necronter eventually succeeded. They called out to the star gods, and the Tan answered. When the Tan first revealed themselves to the Necronter, they were not the gods of salvation the Necronter had hoped for. They were immense, terrifying beings of shimmering energy, vast beyond imagining. To the mortal eyes of the Necronter, the Tan appeared as shifting forms of light and power, their shapes constantly in flux, their presence like the blazing heart of a star. But the Necronter, despite their fear, saw in the Tan an opportunity, a chance to escape their fate. The Tan, for their part, had never encountered beings like the Necronter before. Mortal creatures, bound to the flesh, driven by a relentless need to conquer death. The Tan, who had spent eons feeding on the energies of stars, were intrigued by these new beings. More than that, they hungered for more than just the distant light of stars. The Tan realized that the energies of sentient life were far more satisfying, far richer than anything they had consumed before. This was something new, something the star gods could exploit. Seeing the desperation in the Necronter, the the Tan presented themselves as divine saviors. They offered a simple bargain: immortality in exchange for loyalty. The Necronter, who had long since abandoned hope of extending their lives through science, saw in the Tan the answer to their prayers. They believed that, with the power of these star gods, they could finally free themselves from the curse of their short, agonizing lives. In their desperation, they accepted the Tannis offer, not realizing the true cost of the bargain they were about to make. To bind the Tan to their service, the Necronter built immense bodies for the star gods. These constructs were made from living metal, a substance that could reshape itself and was capable of housing the raw energy of the Tan. It took all of the Necronter's skill and knowledge to create these forms, but once they were complete, the Tan descended into them, and for the first time they took physical shape. These new bodies were titanic, godlike, and nearly indestructible. The Tan, once formless entities of energy, now walked the stars in terrifying splendor, their power focused and magnified. With their new forms, the Tan revealed their true natures. They were not benevolent saviors, but cosmic predators, driven by an insatiable hunger for the energies of living beings. The Necronter, however, were too blinded by their hope for immortality to see this truth. They knelt before the Tan, believing that they had finally found the means to escape their curse. The Tan, in turn, smiled. If such entities could smile, knowing that they had gained an army of loyal servants who would help them spread their dominion across the galaxy. As part of their pact, the Tan promised to reshape the Necronter, to grant them the eternal life they craved. But this immortality would not come in the form they expected. The Necronter believed they would be granted bodies free from the ravages of time and radiation, but the Tan had a far darker transformation in mind. They began a great work, using their unimaginable powers to prepare the Necronter for the next stage of their existence. It would be a process that would forever change the course of the galaxy. Under the direction of the Tan, the Necronter began to reshape their civilization. Their vast armies were equipped with new technologies and weapons powered by the unimaginable energies of their new gods. Their fleets were remade, their cities restructured, all in preparation for the war that was to come. For the Tan had not come merely to grant immortality. They had come to wage war on the old ones, and the Necronter were to be their instruments of destruction. As the Tan prepared the Necronter for their transformation, the star gods also began to indulge their hunger. Entire worlds were consumed, their populations drained of life as the Tan fed. The Necronter, now fully in the thrall of their new gods, offered up these sacrifices willingly, believing it was a necessary price to pay for the gift of eternal life. The skies above Necronter worlds burned as the Tan feasted, their power growing with each life they devoured. But for all the power and promises of the Tan, the Necronter had little understanding of the true nature of the forces they had unleashed. They did not realize that the path they were now on was one that would strip them of everything they had once been, and that their souls, once so desperate for salvation, were already lost. The star gods had come, and with them, the fate of the Necronter would soon be sealed. The pact between the Necronter and the Tan would be the moment that forever changed the fate of the galaxy. With the arrival of the Tan in their physical forms, towering over the Necronter in their bodies of living metal, the Necronter believed their salvation was at hand. The Tan, radiant and terrible in their power, offered them a simple choice: eternal life in exchange for absolute loyalty. This was the promise the Necronter had yearned for since the earliest days of their empire, and they were ready to embrace it at any cost. Led by the Triarch and their ruler, the Silent King, the Necronter welcomed the star gods with reverence and awe. Their desperation for immortality overshadowed any caution, and they willingly placed their entire civilization in the hands of these ancient beings. The Silent King, always a calculating leader, saw no other path for his people. He recognized that their war against the Old Ones was futile in their current state. The Old Ones, with their mastery of the warp and their psychic powers, could not be defeated by conventional means. The Silent King, like his people, had grown tired of watching his kind suffer and die, knowing their war with the Old Ones would only lead to further extinction. The Tan represented a chance for victory, a chance to overcome their most hated foes and escape the curse of their mortality. The Tan, for their part, did not truly care about the fate of the Necronter. They were beings of incomprehensible power and appetite, and their only desire was to feed on the energies of the stars. And now, thanks to their discovery of the Necronter, they had learned of a new, richer source of sustenance, the energies of living beings. The pact they offered was not born of compassion or benevolence, but of calculated self-interest. In the Necronter, they saw a tool, an army that could help them expand their dominion and feed their insatiable hunger. The Silent King, acting as the voice of his people, made the decision to accept the Tan's offer. The pact was sealed, not with words, but with a dark ritual of transference. The Necronter gathered en masse before their new gods, and the Tan, wielding the cosmic forces they had mastered, began the process of transformation. The promise of immortality was fulfilled, but it came at a terrible price. The Tan had no intention of granting the Necronter freedom from their physical bodies in the way they had imagined. Instead, the Tan used their immense power to strip the Necronter of their very flesh. Their souls were torn from their bodies and bound to shells of living metal, similar to the forms that the Tan themselves inhabited. The Necronter were transformed into the Necron, a race of undying machines. The process was excruciating, and once it was complete, the Necronter realized the full horror of what they had become. Their minds had been dulled, their emotions suppressed, and their individuality all but erased. They were now little more than soulless automatons, their consciousnesses enslaved within their new metallic forms. They had achieved the immortality they sought, but at the cost of their very souls. The Necron would never again know joy, sorrow, or even the simple pleasure of existence. They had become eternal, but in that eternity, they found only emptiness. The Silent King, the architect of this dark pact, watched in silence as his people were transformed. He had foreseen the cost of the Tan's gift, though even he had not anticipated the full horror of it. Yet, bound by the pact, he could not turn back. His people were now slaves to the Tan, their eternal existence tied to the will of their new gods. The Silent King, despite his deep sorrow, knew there was no way to undo what had been done. His people had become the instruments of the Tan's will, and their fate was now bound to the star gods for all eternity. With their new forms, the Necron were granted unimaginable power. Their bodies of living metal were nearly indestructible, capable of regenerating from even the most grievous wounds. They no longer aged, no longer suffered from the ravages of their sun's radiation. Their once frail, decaying bodies had been replaced with shells of pure power, and they were now equipped with the most advanced technologies in the galaxy. The Tan bestowed upon the Necron weapons of unimaginable destruction, tools that could annihilate entire worlds with ease. The Necron armies were reborn as an unstoppable force, ready to march to war once more. The Tan themselves grew even stronger. As the Necrons spread across the galaxy, conquering and slaughtering in the name of their new gods, the Tan fed on the life forces of their victims. Entire planets were harvested, their populations drained of life as the Tan devoured their energies. The Necron became the enforcers of the star gods' will, their every action serving the insatiable hunger of their masters. And as the Tan feasted, their power grew. They became living gods in every sense of the word, their influence spreading across the galaxy like a dark tide. The Necron Empire, once driven by the desperate desire for survival, was now a soulless war machine, bent on the domination of all life. Under the guidance of the Tan, they launched a war of annihilation against the Old Ones, the beings they had once hated for their long lives and psychic power. The Necron armies, now bolstered by the might of their new forms and the godlike power of the Tan, set out to fulfill their ancient desire for revenge. The war in heaven, which had simmered for millennia, was about to erupt into a conflict that would reshape the cosmos itself. Yet, even as the Necron waged war at the behest of the Tan, a shadow of doubt lingered in the mind of the Silent King. He had traded his people's souls for eternal life, but in doing so, he had condemned them to a fate worse than death. As the star gods grew fat on the energies of the living, the Silent King began to realize the true cost of the pact they had made. His people had become slaves, not only to the Tan but to their own immortality, trapped in bodies that would never know peace or rest. And so, even as the Necron armies marched across the stars, crushing all who stood before them, a seed of rebellion began to grow within the Silent King. He would not let his people remain in bondage forever. The Silent King knew that one day he would have to break the chains that bound his race to the star gods. But for now, the Necron were bound to the will of the Tan, their eternal war just beginning, and the galaxy trembled at the sight of the undying legions that marched in the name of the star gods. As the pact with the Tan took hold, the transformation of the Necronter into the Necron began. A dark and brutal metamorphosis that would strip away everything that had once defined them. The Tan, in their newly crafted forms of living metal, stood as divine overseers, wielding cosmic powers far beyond mortal comprehension. With their pact sealed, they initiated the ritual that would reshape the Necronter forever, unleashing the full force of their godlike abilities upon their new servants. The process was not one of slow adaptation, but an immediate and catastrophic change. Under the control of the Tan, the Necronter were systematically dismantled on a fundamental level. Their fragile, decaying bodies, so long tormented by radiation, disease, and the curse of their star, were broken down atom by atom. Their biological forms, once proud but always fragile, were erased in a methodical, horrifying disintegration. It was not a painless process. Though their bodies were falling apart, their minds remained aware, trapped in a nightmare of dissolution. As their physical forms were annihilated, their essence, their very souls, was ripped from their bodies. The Tan, wielding the strange powers of the cosmos, captured the souls of the Necronter, binding them to the material realm in ways that defied the natural laws of life and death. The Tan did not simply remove the Necronter's souls from their bodies. They enslaved them. The raw life energy of the Necronter was now contained within the new metallic bodies that the Tan had crafted for them. This living metal, also known as necrodermis, could heal itself, regenerate, and adapt to damage, making the Necron bodies nearly indestructible. Once this ghastly process was complete, the Necronter emerged as the Necron. No longer flesh and bone, they had become immortal machine beings, encased in cold, unfeeling metal. Their consciousnesses remained intact, but their minds had been altered in the process. Gone were the passions, the ambitions, the hopes, and fears that had once driven them. The Tan did not want their new servants to be burdened with the flaws of mortal life. They wanted warriors who were obedient, emotionless, and driven by nothing but the will of their masters. The Necron bodies were built for war, designed to be the ultimate instruments of destruction. Each Necron warrior was encased in a gleaming metallic skeleton, their bodies imbued with advanced technology that far surpassed anything the galaxy had seen. These new forms were built to last for eternity, immune to the ravages of time, radiation, or any other force that had once plagued their organic forms. They no longer needed food, water, or rest. The living metal of their bodies could repair any damage, allowing them to rise again and again, even after being shattered on the battlefield. Though the Necron were now nearly indestructible, their transformation came with a terrible price. Their souls had been forever bound to the metallic shells they inhabited, and in the process, their sense of self was fractured. The majority of the Necron had their minds dulled, reduced to little more than automata. These warriors could follow commands and fight with precision, but their ability to think independently had been almost entirely erased. Only a few of the highest-ranking Necron retained any semblance of their former intelligence and personality, though even they were haunted by the fragmented memories of their past lives. Among these few were the Necron overlords and their lieutenants, the lords, who commanded the legions of their newly transformed kin. The Silent King himself, Zarek, retained his full mind, as did a small number of other high-ranking leaders. These elite few were granted the ability to command their armies with ruthless efficiency, while the lesser Necron became mindless instruments of war, following orders with cold, mechanical precision. Though the overlords retained their intelligence, the transformation had left them hollow and bitter, their former ambitions reduced to little more than distant echoes in the vast emptiness of their new existence. Zarek, the Silent King, bore the weight of what he had done. He had consigned his entire race to this eternal, soulless existence in the hopes of preserving them, but he now realized the true cost of the bargain. The Necron were no longer the people he had once ruled. They had become a vast, unstoppable legion of death, marching to the will of the Tan without thought or feeling. Their former culture, their history, and their individuality had been lost, sacrificed in the name of immortality. Now they were little more than tools of their new gods, forever bound to serve the Tannis' hunger for conquest and power. The transformation also severed the Necron from the warp. Once, like all sentient beings, the Necronter had souls that were connected to the immaterial dimension of the warp. But now, their new metallic bodies had no presence in the warp. They were entirely cut off from that strange, psychic realm, immune to the powers of the warp but also devoid of any connection to the afterlife. To the Necron, this was not a salvation, it was a curse. Death had been cheated, but at the cost of everything that made life worth living. They were now eternal, but that eternity was one of cold, unfeeling existence. As the transformation was completed, the Tan now stood at the head of a vast army of immortal, indestructible soldiers. The Necron, once a desperate and dying race, had been reborn as the ultimate weapon in the Tannis war against the Old Ones. The Necron legions, with their gleaming metallic bodies and advanced weaponry, were ready to march to war once again, but this time they were no longer fighting for survival. Now, they fought as the enslaved instruments of the star gods, their minds and souls forever bound to the will of their new masters. The Tan, having gained control over this newly forged race, began to reshape the Necron civilization. Their cities became vast, cold fortresses of metal and stone, their once grandiose monuments and temples now replaced with structures of brutal, functional design. Their war machines, fueled by the powers of the Tan, were remade into weapons of unimaginable destruction. Their fleets, once used to explore the stars, became engines of conquest, their purpose no longer driven by curiosity or ambition, but by the insatiable hunger of the star gods. And so, the Necron, reborn as eternal warriors, set out to fulfill the will of their new gods. They would become the scourge of the galaxy, marching across the stars with no remorse, no mercy, and no hope of redemption. Their transformation was complete, and with it, the fate of the galaxy was sealed. The Necron had become death incarnate, their once vibrant civilization now reduced to a legion of soulless, eternal killers. The galaxy trembled at their approach, for wherever the Necron went, They brought only death, destruction, and the cold, unrelenting silence of the grave. With the transformation of the Necronter into the Necron complete, the galaxy teetered on the edge of an all-consuming conflict. The Tan, now in full control of their newly forged legions, turned their gaze toward the Old Ones. The ancient enemies of the Necronter, the Old Ones, had reigned supreme for eons, their empire spanning the stars. Masters of the warp and wielders of immense psychic power, the Old Ones had shaped much of the galaxy, guiding the evolution of countless species and manipulating the fabric of reality itself. Their dominion, however, had long been resented by the Necronter, whose short lives and suffering beneath their home star had fueled a deep and bitter hatred for the ancient race. Now, armed with their new metallic bodies and bolstered by the godlike power of the Tan, the Necron were ready to strike. The war that had once simmered in the hearts of the Necronter now erupted into full-scale conflict, a war that would engulf the galaxy and reshape the cosmos. The Old Ones, with their mastery of the warp and their ability to bend reality, were not caught unaware. They had watched the rise of the Necronter from afar, observing the changes in their empire and the influence of the Tan. They knew of the pact that had been made and understood the threat posed by this new alliance. The Old Ones had faced many challenges in their long history, but none had prepared them for the relentless and soulless armies that the Necron had become. The Necron legions, under the command of their overlords and the Silent King, launched their assault on the Old Ones with terrifying efficiency. They swept across the galaxy, their metallic bodies impervious to the ravages of war, their weapons capable of devastating entire worlds. The Necron used technology beyond the comprehension of most species, deploying weapons that could disassemble matter at the molecular level, tear through space-time, and reduce even the most fortified planets to barren wastelands. These weapons, gifted by the Tan, were beyond the scope of anything the Old Ones had encountered before. The Old Ones, however, were not without power. Their mastery of the warp allowed them to manipulate reality itself, using psychic energies to craft entire armies from nothing and to shape the battlefield in ways that defied logic. They called upon their vast knowledge of the cosmos, drawing power from the immaterium to defend their worlds. With their psychic abilities, the Old Ones could summon storms of raw energy, warp space itself to create impassable barriers, and even bend time to their will. Their power, though formidable, was countered by the Necron's complete detachment from the warp. The Necron, being soulless, had no presence in the immaterium and were entirely immune to its effects. The Old Ones could not touch them psychically, and this made the Necron a terrifying and nearly indestructible force on the battlefield. As the war escalated, the Old Ones deployed their greatest strengths, their ability to create and manipulate life. In response to the growing Necron threat, the Old Ones accelerated the evolution of several species, crafting new life forms that would serve as soldiers in their war against the Necron. Among these creations were the Eldar, a psychic race imbued with great intelligence, longevity, and a deep connection to the warp. The Old Ones hoped that the Eldar, with their innate psychic abilities, would help to turn the tide of the war. Alongside the Eldar, the Old Ones shaped many other species, each tailored for specific roles in their grand strategy against the Necron and the Tan. The Krork, a powerful and brutish warrior race, were created to serve as shock troops, while other, more specialized beings were designed to counter the Necron's mechanical precision and technological dominance. Despite the Old Ones' efforts to create these new warriors, the Necron's advance was relentless. Entire star systems were laid to waste as the Necron fleets swept across the galaxy, their cold, mechanical legions unstoppable in their pursuit of victory. The Tan, now fully unleashed, joined the war directly. They descended upon the Old Ones' worlds, consuming the life energies of entire civilizations. The Tan reveled in their newfound freedom, indulging their insatiable hunger by draining the stars themselves of their energy. The very suns that had once given life to the galaxy became tools for the Tannis gluttony, leaving dead, frozen worlds in their wake. The old ones, despite their vast power, found themselves increasingly outmatched. The Necron, immune to the psychic abilities that had once been the old ones' greatest weapon, were unstoppable on the battlefield. The old ones' carefully crafted defenses crumbled under the relentless assault of the Necron legions and the raw destructive force of the Tan. World after world fell, each one consumed in the growing darkness of the Necron Empire. As the war raged on, the old ones began to realize that their psychic powers, while potent, were not enough to stem the tide of destruction. The Necron, with their soulless nature and advanced technology, could not be defeated through conventional means. The old ones, in desperation, began to retreat to the furthest edges of the galaxy, seeking refuge in the warp and relying on the younger races they had created to hold the line against the Necron. But the Necron would not relent. Their legions, tireless and unfeeling, pursued the old ones across the stars, driven by the will of the Tan. The war, which had once been a struggle for survival, had now become a war of annihilation. The Necron sought not only to defeat the old ones, but to erase them from existence entirely. Every trace of the old ones' empire, every world they had touched, was targeted for destruction. The Tan, gluttonous and insatiable, fed on the life forces of the old ones' creations, growing stronger with each victory. The old ones, seeing the impending doom of their civilization, began to take increasingly desperate measures. They used their mastery of the warp to create vast, psychic barriers to hold back the Necron legions, but even these defenses were eventually overcome. The Necron, with their cold, calculating precision, found ways to bypass or break through the old one's strongest fortifications. The galaxy became a war-torn wasteland, with entire regions stripped of life, their stars extinguished by the Tannis hunger. As the conflict dragged on, the cost to both sides grew staggering. The old ones, though powerful, were a finite race, and each loss they suffered brought them closer to extinction. The Necron, for their part, began to experience the strain of eternal warfare. Though their bodies were indestructible, their minds were not. The constant cycle of destruction and resurrection began to take its toll, even on the most powerful of their kind. The Necron lords, once brilliant strategists, started to show signs of wear, their once sharp minds dulled by the endless march of time and the horrors of their existence. Yet, despite the growing weariness on both sides, the war showed no signs of ending. The galaxy had become a vast battleground, with the Necron and their Tan masters seeking total dominance, while the old ones fought desperately to protect what little remained of their empire. It was a war that spanned not just the physical realm, but also the very fabric of reality itself, as the old ones sought to bend the warp to their will in a last-ditch effort to turn the tide. The war in heaven, once confined to the shadows of galactic history, had now become an apocalyptic conflict that would determine the fate of the entire galaxy. The old ones, creators of life and shapers of the stars, found themselves on the brink of extinction. The Necron, their minds shackled to their soulless metallic bodies, fought with the cold efficiency of machines, driven only by the will of their Tan gods. The galaxy trembled beneath the weight of their conflict, and the very stars seemed to dim as the war between the old ones and the Necron reached its terrible zenith. As the war between the Necron and the old ones raged on, the old ones turned increasingly to their most potent weapon, the warp. For eons, the old ones had been the undisputed masters of this immaterial realm, an alternate dimension that existed parallel to the physical universe. The warp, also known as the Immaterium, was a realm of pure psychic energy, a place where thought, emotion, and willpower shaped reality. It was a turbulent, ever-shifting sea of raw power, and the Old Ones had learned to harness it in ways that made them almost godlike in their ability to manipulate the fabric of space and time. In the early days of their dominion, the Old Ones had discovered the warp and its untapped potential. They were among the first to explore its depths and understand its malleable nature. Unlike the physical universe, where the laws of physics and time were constant, the warp responded to the thoughts and emotions of sentient beings. The Old Ones realized that this made the warp a dangerous yet limitless source of power, and over the millennia, they had become adept at shaping it to suit their needs. They could use the warp to travel vast distances in the blink of an eye, create entire realities, and tap into reservoirs of energy far beyond what was possible in the material world. As their war with the Necron intensified, the Old Ones leaned heavily on their psychic abilities to counter their soulless foes. The Necron were impervious to direct psychic assaults, but the Old Ones could still use the warp to influence the battlefield in other ways. With a mere thought, an Old One could summon storms of psychic energy, unleashing destructive torrents that could vaporize matter or disrupt the very fabric of reality. They could manipulate time, slowing it down or speeding it up, confusing and disorienting the Necron. In battle, they could warp space itself, creating vast chasms or impenetrable barriers to protect their forces or trap the enemy. In some cases, the Old Ones could even bend gravity, causing entire planetary surfaces to shift and fracture, breaking the Necron legions beneath the weight of collapsing continents. The Old Ones' mastery over the warp extended beyond the battlefield. They used their psychic powers to create complex systems of gateways and portals that allowed them to move across the galaxy almost instantaneously. These networks, known as webways, were stable tunnels through the warp, impervious to its chaotic nature. Through the webways, the Old Ones could appear anywhere at any time, striking the Necron from multiple fronts and vanishing before a counterattack could be mounted. The Necron, despite their technological superiority, found themselves unable to match the sheer fluidity and unpredictability of the Old Ones' tactics, for the warp was an element they could neither access nor fully understand. But the warp was not without its dangers. The Immaterium was an inherently unstable and unpredictable place. Though the Old Ones were masters of its currents, the deeper they delved into its power, the more they began to stir forces beyond even their control. The warp was not merely a tool. It was a living entity, shaped by the thoughts and emotions of all sentient beings in the universe. As the war between the Necron and the Old Ones grew more intense, the fear, anger, and desperation of countless lives lost in the conflict began to warp the Immaterium itself. The emotions of war, hatred, rage, sorrow, rippled through the warp, creating storms of chaotic energy. These storms were not merely random. They began to take on a life of their own, feeding on the psychic energy of the galaxy's sentient races. Despite these growing risks, the Old Ones pushed forward. They knew that their only chance of surviving the Necron's relentless onslaught was to harness the full might of the warp. Their greatest minds worked tirelessly, seeking new ways to shape and channel its power. To bolster their forces, the Old Ones began to craft new, psychically attuned races. These species, born from the genetic mastery of the Old Ones, were designed to be highly receptive to the warp, able to wield its energies with ease. The Eldar, one of the most significant of these creations, were a race of beings whose natural affinity for the warp made them potent weapons against the Necron. They could manipulate psychic energy on a level that few other species could match, and the Old Ones nurtured them, hoping that their power would help turn the tide of the war. The Old Ones also attempted to instill psychic abilities in other species they had nurtured. Some, like the Slan, became powerful practitioners of the warp, but others were less successful. Despite their efforts, the Old Ones were unable to fully prepare many of their creations for the sheer magnitude of the conflict they faced. The Necron, though immune to psychic manipulation, countered with overwhelming force, their star-spanning fleets and near-indestructible legions decimating worlds faster than the Old Ones could reinforce them. Yet the Old Ones did not give up their strategy of using the warp. In their desperation, they began to weave ever more intricate and powerful spells, manipulating the very fabric of the immaterium to create new life forms, bolster their armies, and hold back the advancing Necron. They sought to alter reality itself, attempting to reshape the universe into a place where the Necron could not follow. But with every spell, every tear in the fabric of the warp, they destabilized the immaterium even further. As the war dragged on, strange entities began to emerge from the depths of the warp. These beings, formed from the raw emotions of the galaxy's sentient beings, were drawn to the conflict like moths to a flame. The psychic energies of the Old Ones and their creations, combined with the escalating fear, anger, and death toll of the war, had given birth to creatures that should not have existed. These beings, later known as the first demons, were malevolent entities formed from the darkest emotions of the galaxy. They had no physical form in the material universe but could manifest through the warp, wreaking havoc upon both the Old Ones and the Necron. The Old Ones, recognizing the threat posed by these new entities, tried to contain them, but it was too late. The warp storms that had begun as mere ripples were now roaring tempests, and the demons fed on the chaos, growing in power. The Old Ones' control over the warp began to falter as they realized that they had unleashed a force beyond even their comprehension. The demons, though formless and mutable, were drawn to the psychic energies of the Old Ones and the younger races. They began to tear at the barriers between the material realm and the warp, seeking entry into the physical universe. Entire worlds were consumed by these creatures, devoured by the raging storms that now swept across the galaxy. Despite the growing chaos, the Old Ones fought on. They poured their remaining strength into the warp, trying to stave off both the Necron and the horrors they had inadvertently unleashed. But their power was waning. The more they used the warp, the more unstable it became. The demons, growing in number and strength, could no longer be contained, and the psychic races the Old Ones had created found themselves increasingly vulnerable to the warp storms that ravaged their worlds. The war had reached a new, terrifying stage. No longer was it just a battle between the Necron and the Old Ones. Now, the very fabric of reality was at stake. The galaxy was fracturing under the weight of the conflict, and the Old Ones found themselves caught between two unstoppable forces: the soulless, relentless Necron and the growing maelstrom of chaos in the warp. The Old Ones' once great mastery of the immaterium was no longer enough to protect them from the consequences of their own power. As the demonic entities multiplied, feeding on the raw emotions of the galaxy's suffering, the Old Ones realized that their control over the warp was slipping away. The shaping of the warp, once the Old Ones' greatest strength, was now becoming their greatest liability. The immaterium, once a tool of creation and manipulation, was transforming into a realm of nightmare, its energies twisted by the countless tragedies of the war in heaven. And as the Old Ones grappled with this unraveling, the Necron continued their merciless advance, ever closer to final victory. With the transformation of the Necronter into the Necrons complete, the galaxy faced a new and horrifying chapter. The Tan, having been freed from their cosmic prisons and brought to the material realm by the Necronter, began their reign of terror. These star gods, ancient entities of unimaginable power, were not mere allies. They were tyrants whose insatiable appetites for energy and dominion would reshape the galaxy. As the Necronter had cast aside their flesh, the Tan offered them a new existence. This new form, cold and metallic, was empowered by the very energies of the stars. The Necrons, now bound to the will of the Tan, served them without question. The ancient entities reveled in their newfound power, commanding their Necron legions to fulfill their every whim. The Tan were not simply deities. They were creatures of pure energy and thought, with their consciousness intertwined with the universe. Each one was a unique aspect of reality, embodying concepts such as destruction, war, and starvation. They sought to spread their influence across the galaxy, establishing themselves as the true masters of existence. With their newfound power, the Tan embarked on a campaign of destruction. They consumed entire stars, draining their energy to sate their ravenous appetites. Planets became mere vessels for their hunger, and the Tan descended upon civilizations with little regard for the lives they extinguished. Whole worlds were obliterated, their resources devoured, leaving behind lifeless husks. The Necron legions, under the guidance of their Tan masters, swept across the galaxy like a shadow, extinguishing any spark of resistance. In this new order, the Tan delighted in the chaos they unleashed. Their reign was marked by an unrelenting pursuit of power and dominance. Entire civilizations fell before them, their inhabitants either exterminated or transformed into Necron servitors, bound to the will of their Tan overlords. The galaxy had become a battleground where the ancient races, including the Old Ones, struggled to survive against this overwhelming force. The Old Ones, realizing the catastrophic turn of events, sought to unify the races they had created and nurtured. They knew that the Necron and their Tan masters posed an existential threat not only to their own survival but to the balance of the galaxy itself. Gathering their remaining forces, the Old Ones attempted to forge alliances with the Eldar, the Slan, and other races that had been born from their genetic mastery. They shared their knowledge of the warp, hoping to harness its power against the Tan and their Necron enforcers. But the Tan were not to be underestimated. They thrived on the destruction and despair they caused, growing stronger with every life extinguished. Each star consumed and every planet rendered barren only deepened their connection to the very essence of the galaxy. As the Tan fed on the energy of the cosmos, they began to manifest their powers in terrifying new ways. The Tan became embodiments of fear and destruction, able to unleash cataclysmic forces upon their enemies. They wielded powers that could warp reality itself, tearing open the fabric of space to unleash unspeakable horrors. Their abilities allowed them to create rifts in the fabric of reality, unleashing storms of raw energy that could obliterate everything in their path. The mere presence of a Tan on the battlefield was enough to sow panic and chaos among their enemies, who found themselves caught in a web of despair. As the Tan reveled in their destructive reign, the Old Ones grew desperate. They understood that a direct confrontation with the Tan would be catastrophic. Instead, they sought to strike at the heart of the Necron Empire, targeting key Necron worlds and strongholds. Their forces, now bolstered by their allies, launched a series of raids and ambushes, attempting to disrupt the Tan's plans and weaken their grip on the galaxy. But the Tan were ever watchful. They sensed the gathering storm, the tide of resistance swelling against them. With ruthless efficiency, they dispatched their Necron legions to crush the rebellion. Every world that dared to defy their dominion was met with swift retribution. The Necron, now relentless in their purpose, swept through the galaxy with cold precision, extinguishing any flicker of hope. One particularly infamous battle took place on the world of Igrath, a once thriving planet teeming with life. The Old Ones, along with the Eldar and Slan, mounted a desperate defense against a massive Necron force led by a Tan known as the Deceiver. This entity, renowned for its cunning and treachery, had taken a particular interest in the Old Ones' efforts to unite the races against the Necron threat. As the armies clashed, the Deceiver unleashed its powers, manipulating reality to confuse and disorient the Old Ones' forces. Illusions and shadows twisted the battlefield, causing the Eldar to turn on their allies in panic, while the Necron legions advanced with chilling efficiency. The Old Ones struggled to maintain control over their coalition, their psychic powers strained under the weight of the Tan's influence. The battle raged for days, with losses mounting on both sides, but ultimately, the overwhelming might of the Necron legions and the cunning of the Deceiver proved insurmountable. Yggdrath fell, its vibrant life extinguished, becoming another monument to the Tannis reign of terror. As the war dragged on, the Tan grew more brazen in their actions. They began to turn on one another, drawn by their insatiable desires and hunger for power. Their immense egos and conflicting ambitions resulted in violent clashes among themselves, leading to even greater devastation across the galaxy. The conflict between the Tan splintered their once unified front, creating factions that vied for supremacy. The Necron, once loyal to a single cause, now found themselves caught in a web of intrigue and betrayal as the star gods turned their hunger against each other. The Old Ones seized upon this division, recognizing a glimmer of hope in the infighting of the Tan. They launched coordinated attacks on the Tannis weakened factions, seeking to exploit their discord and weaken their grip on the Necron. In the ensuing chaos, new alliances formed among the various races. The Eldar and Slan, once wary of one another, began to cooperate more closely, sharing their knowledge and resources. They coordinated their psychic powers and technology to create weapons capable of injuring the Tan and disrupting the Necron's relentless advance. However, the Tan were far from defeated. Each faction continued to embody a terrifying aspect of destruction, and their powers remained formidable. While they fought among themselves, the remnants of their united force still wreaked havoc across the galaxy, extinguishing the lives of countless sentient beings. The Tannis hunger could not be quelled, and as they feasted on the energy of stars and worlds alike, the galaxy trembled under their reign. Thus, the Tannis reign of terror continued unabated, their desire for power and dominion unquenchable. The Old Ones and their allies faced insurmountable odds, the galaxy scarred by the relentless pursuit of these star gods. The battle for survival was far from over, and the fate of countless races hung precariously in the balance as the shadows of war deepened, leading to a cataclysmic confrontation that would reshape the very fabric of existence. In the midst of the turmoil brought about by the Tannis reign of terror, the Old Ones realized that their time was running short. They understood that the galaxy was becoming a battleground between cosmic forces beyond their control. The Necrons, now bound to the Tan, advanced relentlessly, extinguishing civilizations and consuming entire worlds. Desperation ignited a spark of creativity within the Old Ones, driving them to seek new paths to ensure their survival against the overwhelming tide of destruction. In their wisdom, the Old Ones turned their attention to genetic manipulation, using their advanced understanding of biology and the warp to create new races. They sought to forge beings that could withstand the cataclysmic energies of the galaxy, individuals capable of resisting the encroaching darkness and potentially tipping the balance against the Tan and their Necron legions. Thus, the Eldar, a race imbued with incredible psychic abilities and elegance, were born. The Old Ones began their work on a world of lush landscapes and vibrant ecosystems. They combined the genetic traits of various species, infusing their creations with the essence of the stars and the warp itself. The Eldar emerged as a race of grace and beauty, with an innate connection to the psychic energies that flowed through the universe. Their bodies were slender and agile, allowing them to move with unparalleled speed and fluidity. They possessed large, expressive eyes that shone with an otherworldly light, reflecting their deep understanding of the cosmos. The Eldar were not merely a new race. They were the embodiment of the Old Ones' hopes and dreams. The Old Ones imparted knowledge and wisdom to the Eldar, teaching them to harness the powers of the warp and to understand the delicate balance of life and death. As the Eldar flourished, they began to develop their own cultures, philosophies, and ways of life, all while remaining ever watchful of the Tan and their Necron minions. While the Eldar were the most prominent creation of the Old Ones, they were not the only ones. In their quest for survival, the Old Ones designed various other races, each with unique traits and abilities. The Slann, ancient and wise, were crafted to be powerful psychers and scholars, embodying the knowledge and teachings of the Old Ones. These amphibious beings were not only resilient but also capable of manipulating the warp in ways that could rival even the most powerful Tan. The Slann's intellect and strategic thinking would prove invaluable in the ongoing conflict against the Necron threat. Another race born from the Old Ones' efforts were the Orcs. Created as a byproduct of experimentation gone awry, the Orcs were intended to be a hardy and adaptable race. Their genetic makeup allowed them to thrive in harsh environments, making them well-suited for survival in a galaxy rife with chaos. However, the Old Ones had underestimated the Orcs' propensity for aggression and warfare. Instead of becoming a force for balance, the Orcs rapidly devolved into a chaotic, fractious society driven by their desire for conquest and destruction. As these new races began to emerge, the Old Ones took great care to instill in them a sense of purpose. They understood that unity was essential if they were to stand a chance against the forces threatening their existence. The Eldar and Slann became pivotal allies, forging bonds of cooperation that spanned across cultures and species. Their respective strengths complemented one another, creating a formidable front against the encroaching darkness. While the Eldar thrived under the guidance of the Old Ones, they were not without their challenges. As their society evolved, the Eldar began to develop their own complex culture, exploring the depths of art, philosophy, and psychic potential. They created vast cities filled with towering spires, exquisite architecture, and intricate art that celebrated their connection to the warp and the cosmos. However, with their newfound powers came hubris, and the Eldar began to push the boundaries of what was possible. This arrogance did not go unnoticed by the Tan, who saw the Eldar as a significant threat. As the Eldar's psychic abilities grew, so too did their vulnerability to the attention of the Tan. The Star Gods, hungry for power and energy, sought to consume the Eldar's burgeoning psychic potential, viewing them as a source of sustenance to fuel their insatiable appetites. Tensions escalated as the Eldar realized they were not alone in their struggles. Other races, too, began to emerge from the shadows of the galaxy. The enigmatic Tau, a species focused on unity and technological advancement, were born during this chaotic era. Their leaders, guided by a philosophy of the greater good, sought to bring peace and stability to the universe, viewing the conflicts between the Eldar and Necrons as a misguided use of resources. This new race would later play a pivotal role in the unfolding saga of the galaxy, adding yet another layer to the already intricate tapestry of existence. Despite their creation of new allies, the Old Ones were not blind to the dangers posed by their own progeny. They understood that the galaxy was a volatile place, and they could not fully control the actions of the races they had spawned. As the Eldar and other newly forged races grew in power, the Old Ones' hopes rested heavily upon their shoulders. They had invested everything in the belief that these new beings could become the harbingers of balance and light in an ever-darkening universe. In their relentless pursuit of survival, the Old Ones pushed the boundaries of their experimentation further. They began to explore the depths of the warp, searching for ancient entities and forces that could aid them in their struggle against the Tan. They reached out to the forces of chaos, not yet fully understanding the dangers that lurked within. This decision would have far-reaching consequences, leading to alliances that would shape the future of the galaxy in unforeseen ways. As the Old Ones crafted new races and sought alliances, the Necron threat loomed ever closer. The galaxy was poised on the brink of chaos, a collision of cosmic forces that would forever alter its fate. The creations of the Old Ones began to prepare for the inevitable confrontation, understanding that their very existence depended on their ability to unite against the tide of darkness. The seeds of conflict had been sown, and as the new races emerged, the galaxy prepared for a struggle of monumental proportions. The old ones, the Eldar, the Slan, and the newly formed Tau knew that the time for action had come. They would need to fight not only for their survival, but also for the soul of the galaxy itself. In the depths of despair, hope flickered like a distant star, guiding them toward the uncertain future that awaited. As the galaxy teetered on the brink of annihilation, a new and unforeseen threat emerged, one that would plunge the cosmos into deeper chaos. The Eldar, now fully aware of their psychic abilities, delved into the warp with increasing frequency, driven by their desire for knowledge and power. This insatiable thirst, however, carried grave consequences, awakening dark forces that had long remained dormant. Among these forces was a malevolent entity known as the Enslaver Plague, a scourge that would sweep through the galaxy, consuming all in its path. The Enslaver Plague originated in the depths of the warp, a realm where the very essence of reality intertwined with the chaotic energies of thought and emotion. It manifested as a psychic contagion, capable of invading the minds of sentient beings and subjugating them to its will. It thrived on the psychic energies emitted by living beings, feeding off their fear, despair, and madness. The more powerful the psyker, the greater the risk of becoming a vessel for this insidious plague. Initially, the Eldar perceived the warp as a vast reservoir of power, a source of strength that could elevate their race to new heights. Yet, their arrogance blinded them to the dangers lurking within. As they conducted rituals and sought to commune with the warp, they unknowingly opened the door to the Enslaver Plague, allowing it to seep into their reality. What began as a whisper in the minds of a few soon spread like wildfire, infecting whole communities and entire worlds. The first signs of the plague's presence manifested in strange phenomena. Eldar settlements experienced unexplained psychic disturbances, with nightmares and hallucinations plaguing their inhabitants. The air crackled with dark energy, and whispers filled the minds of the afflicted, sowing seeds of doubt and fear. Those touched by the Enslaver Plague became increasingly erratic, their minds unraveling as they succumbed to despair and madness. As the plague spread, its influence extended beyond the Eldar, touching other races across the galaxy. The Necrons, with their ancient technology and relentless nature, initially seemed immune to the psychic disturbances. However, even they could not escape the consequences of the plague. The Tan, seeking to consume the psychic energies released by the chaos, began to turn their attention toward the Eldar and the burgeoning psychic fields. With the arrival of the Enslaver Plague, the galaxy descended into a state of panic. Entire worlds fell into chaos, as those infected by the plague lost their sense of self and became thralls of the Enslavers, a monstrous race born from the madness of the warp. These beings, once intelligent and powerful, were transformed into mindless puppets, driven only by a singular desire to spread the plague further. The Enslavers reveled in the chaos they wrought, devouring the psychic energies of their victims and growing in number as they converted more sentient beings into their ranks. The Old Ones, witnessing the devastation wrought by the Enslaver Plague, understood the gravity of the situation. They convened, recognizing that their earlier attempts to create balance in the galaxy had inadvertently unleashed forces beyond their control. The Eldar's reckless exploration of the warp had birthed a calamity that threatened to extinguish the very essence of life across the cosmos. In a desperate bid to contain the plague, the Old Ones sought to find a way to reverse the damage inflicted by the Enslaver Plague. They delved deeper into the mysteries of the warp, hoping to uncover ancient knowledge that could provide a solution. However, as they probed the depths, they discovered that the Enslaver Plague was not merely a consequence of their actions. It was a reflection of their own hubris, a manifestation of their greatest fears. As the Eldar societies crumbled under the weight of the plague, the surviving Eldar sought to combat the threat, forming alliances with the Slann and other races that still retained their sanity. Together, they began to devise strategies to repel the enslavers, relying on their collective psychic powers to push back against the encroaching madness. However, the enslavers were not easily deterred, and their numbers continued to swell as they consumed all in their path. Battles erupted across the galaxy as the infected clashed with those who resisted the plague. Eldar warriors, once proud and noble, now found themselves fighting against their own kin, those who had succumbed to the madness. The sight of once great champions, twisted into mindless thralls, struck terror into the hearts of those who remained untainted. The Eldar struggled not only against the enslavers but against the horrors of their own creations. In this maelstrom of chaos, the Slann emerged as pivotal players. They harnessed their formidable psychic powers to shield their kin from the worst of the plague's effects. Their ancient knowledge and wisdom became crucial in devising rituals to banish the enslavers, giving hope to those who still clung to their sanity. The Slann recognized the need for a united front and worked tirelessly to unite the Eldar and other races in a coalition to face the growing threat. In their desperation, the Eldar attempted to regain control of the warp, seeking to contain the enslaver plague at its source. They sought the counsel of their most potent psychers, who convened in a grand ritual designed to purge the warp of the plague's taint. This ritual was fraught with danger, as the forces of chaos roiled in response to their attempts to exert control. The balance between the material realm and the warp hung by a thread, and any misstep could spell doom for all involved. As the ritual reached its zenith, the psychic energies unleashed sent shockwaves throughout the galaxy. The Eldar's desperate bid for salvation awakened further dark forces, unleashing a wave of chaos that reverberated across the fabric of reality. The enslaver plague surged, spiraling out of control as the infected thralls multiplied, their influence spreading like a shadow across the stars. The galaxy trembled as the conflict reached its climax. The Old Ones, the Eldar, the Slann, and the remaining free races found themselves embroiled in a cataclysmic struggle against the enslaver plague. Worlds burned, civilizations crumbled, and despair hung heavy in the air. The hope that had flickered like a candle in the dark now seemed like a distant memory. In the midst of this chaos, the Tan, drawn by the disturbance in the warp, began to intervene. Their hunger for psychic energies drove them to consume the very essence of the enslavers, further complicating the conflict. The galaxy was now a battlefield, a chaotic clash of powers that threatened to engulf everything. As the tides of battle turned and twisted, it became evident that the enslaver plague had forever altered the fabric of the galaxy. What had begun as a quest for knowledge and power had spiraled into a conflict of cosmic proportions. In this dark hour, the surviving races knew that they could no longer rely solely on their own strengths. They would need to forge alliances and make sacrifices to stand against the tide of despair. The enslaver plague marked a turning point, a catastrophic event that reshaped the destiny of the galaxy. The echoes of the conflict would resonate through the ages, leaving scars that would never fully heal. The struggle against the darkness had only just begun, and as the remnants of hope flickered in the gloom, the races of the galaxy prepared to face the unknown horrors that lay ahead. As the galaxy reeled from the aftermath of the enslaver plague, the fragile alliances that had formed among the various races began to show signs of strain. The Tan, the star gods who had once promised the Necronter eternal power and protection, revealed their true nature. In their insatiable hunger for souls, they had grown complacent and manipulative, believing themselves to be the ultimate masters of fate. As the Necronter fought valiantly against the enslaver threat, they remained blissfully unaware of the impending betrayal that would shatter their world. The betrayal began with the Silent King, the supreme leader of the Necronter and the architect of their transformation into the Necron. He had long been a loyal servant of the Tan, yet as the war raged on, he started to see the cracks in their grand plan. The Tan, in their quest for dominance, began to demand more sacrifices from the Necronter, pushing them deeper into a relentless cycle of violence and bloodshed. They cared little for the lives of the Necronter. Instead, they sought to manipulate them like puppets, using their newfound power to further their own ends. As the Silent King contemplated the unfolding chaos, he realized that the Tan were not the saviors they claimed to be. The more the Necronter battled against the enslavers, the more the Tan fed off their psychic energies and life forces. The Silent King recognized that he had unwittingly become an instrument of the Tan's insatiable hunger, and a growing sense of betrayal ignited within him. He gathered his most trusted advisors and began to plot a rebellion against their supposed masters. Meanwhile, the Tan grew increasingly arrogant, convinced that their victory over the enslavers would solidify their dominance over the Necronter. They failed to notice the seeds of dissent that had taken root within their ranks, as discontent simmered among the Necron leaders. The Silent King and his loyal followers began to communicate with the remaining Necronter who had not undergone the transformation, forming a clandestine alliance determined to wrest control from the grasp of the Tan. As tensions escalated, the Silent King led a coup against the Tan, gathering his forces in a bold move to confront the Star Gods directly. The confrontation took place on a desolate battlefield littered with the remnants of previous conflicts. The Silent King stood at the forefront, flanked by his most formidable warriors, ready to challenge the Tan's authority. The air crackled with energy as the Tan sensed the growing rebellion and prepared to crush it. In a fierce battle that shook the very foundations of the galaxy, the Silent King unleashed the full might of the Necron forces against the Tan. The Necron warriors, fueled by rage and betrayal, fought with a ferocity that caught the Tan off guard. Their metallic forms clashed against the ethereal beings as the Silent King wielded the power of the Void, an ancient weapon forged in the crucible of the stars. The battle raged on, echoes of conflict reverberating across the cosmos. As the fighting escalated, the Tan realized that the Silent King had orchestrated a rebellion of unprecedented scale. They became enraged, turning their attention to the very beings they had once relied upon. The tide of battle shifted as the Tan unleashed their full wrath upon the Necron warriors, using their godlike abilities to decimate entire legions in moments. The air filled with the screams of dying warriors as the Necron ranks faltered against the overwhelming power of their former masters. Yet the Silent King refused to back down. He rallied his remaining forces, tapping into the knowledge and power they had gained from their transformation. He understood that the fight against the Tan was not just for their survival, but for their freedom from the chains that had bound them for so long. The battle raged on, but slowly, the Necron forces began to gain the upper hand. The Silent King wielded the Void against the Tan, countering their attacks with calculated precision. His resolve inspired his warriors, and they pressed on, determined to break free from the Tan's control. The skies darkened with the energy of their conflict, as the two sides clashed, each unwilling to yield. In a final, desperate attempt to regain control, the Tan unleashed their full might, channeling the energies of the warp to obliterate the Necron forces. But the Silent King, anticipating this move, had devised a strategy to counter it. He activated the Void, absorbing the chaotic energies unleashed by the Tan and redirecting them back against their creators. The resulting explosion of power shook the galaxy to its core, sending shockwaves through the fabric of reality. In that moment of chaos, the Tan realized they had underestimated the Silent King and the determination of the Necron. They had believed themselves invulnerable, Yet the rebellion had ignited a flame of resistance that could not be extinguished. The battle took a deadly turn as the Silent King and his loyalists fought with renewed vigor, channeling the very chaos the Tan had unleashed back against them. The Silent King's forces surged forward, driven by a newfound sense of purpose. The Necron warriors pressed their advantage, pushing the Tan back with relentless force. The tide had turned, and the Tan, once the masters of the galaxy, now faced their greatest challenge yet. With each fallen Tan, the Necron grew stronger as they absorbed the remnants of the energy released during the conflict. In a final act of desperation, the Tan attempted to flee, realizing that their hold over the Necronter had crumbled. They scattered across the galaxy, their once unbreakable bond with the Necron shattered. The Silent King, victorious yet wary, knew that the battle was not truly over. The Tan may have been defeated, but their influence lingered, a dark shadow that could rise again. As the dust settled on the battlefield, the Necron looked out at the galaxy they had once fought to dominate. The war had taken a heavy toll on all involved, and the remnants of their civilization lay scattered among the stars. The Silent King recognized that the Necronter must now forge a new path, one free from the chains of the past. He led his people in a new direction, vowing to safeguard their future and seek redemption for the sins of their predecessors. Meanwhile, the Old Ones, who had once watched over the galaxy with benevolence, now found themselves in a precarious position. The tumult of the wars and the rise of the enslaver plague had weakened their power. The Old Ones were not without their own secrets and failings. Their once unshakable hold on the cosmos had begun to wane, and the consequences of their actions were coming home to roost. In their attempts to create a balanced galaxy, the Old Ones had inadvertently set off a chain of events that would spiral out of control. The conflicts they had sought to manage now threatened to engulf them. As the enslaver plague ravaged worlds, the Old Ones realized that they had become disconnected from the very beings they had once nurtured. Their arrogance blinded them to the reality that their creations were evolving beyond their control. The Eldar, in their bid for survival, began to question the motives of the Old Ones. They had long believed that the Old Ones were their protectors, but as they witnessed the chaos around them, doubt crept into their hearts. They began to wonder if the Old Ones were simply another facet of the power that sought to dominate the galaxy, perhaps no different from the Tan. In their desperation, the Eldar turned inward, focusing on their own survival. They sought to harness their psychic abilities to forge a path through the darkness. But with each attempt, the fabric of reality grew more fragile. Their reckless pursuits often brought them into conflict with the Old Ones, who struggled to maintain order in a galaxy on the brink of collapse. As tensions mounted, the Old Ones faced the harsh reality that they were losing their grip on the galaxy. The balance they had fought so hard to create was unraveling, and the consequences of their past decisions haunted them. The rise of the Necrons, the chaos of the enslaver plague, and the betrayal of the Tan had pushed them to the brink of extinction. In a desperate bid to restore order, the Old Ones convened to devise a plan. They understood that their time was running short, and the balance of power in the galaxy could shift at any moment. They resolved to confront the Necrons and the Eldar, seeking to re-establish their authority. But as they set their plans in motion, they realized that the very beings they sought to control were evolving, adapting, and gaining strength. In the shadows, the remnants of the Tan began to conspire, seeking to reclaim their power and exact vengeance on those who had betrayed them. They lurked in the corners of the galaxy, manipulating events from afar, ready to strike when the time was right. The Old Ones, blinded by their arrogance, failed to see the threats gathering around them, even as the galaxy teetered on the brink of destruction. As the war continued to rage, the Old Ones found themselves fighting not only for their survival but for the very soul of the galaxy. The betrayals and conflicts had taken a toll on their essence, and the cosmic balance they had once upheld began to slip away. With the Silent King leading the Necron into a new era, the Eldar grappling with their own psychic powers, and the specter of the Tan looming large, the Old Ones understood that they were no longer the architects of fate but mere players in a game of cosmic proportions. The fall of the Old Ones was imminent, a tragic culmination of their hubris and the consequences of their actions. The galaxy had become a battleground of unchecked power, and the echoes of their legacy would ripple through time, leaving behind a galaxy forever changed. As the Old Ones faced the twilight of their existence, they could only hope that their creations would find a way to navigate the storm they had inadvertently unleashed. The Age of Reckoning was upon them, and the galaxy held its breath as the final chapters of this epic saga unfolded.